Welcome back to the fourth episode of Directed by Steven Spielberg. Today's film is the 1977 sci-fi classic Close Encounters of the Third Kind, starring Richard Dreyfuss. This marks Spielberg's first foray into the sci-fi genre, which he would go on to become almost synonymous with in his future films. Shockingly, this was my first time actually watching Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which is perhaps his most famous film that I had not seen to this point. So I was very excited to check out this film and give you my thoughts on what is often considered to be Spielberg's most personal film. So without further ado, let's get started. Close Encounters of the Third Kind, in its most basic description, is very much the story of a man and his quest for the truth. It is a story that follows an everyman electrician named Roy Neary, played by Richard Dreyfuss, who experiences a close encounter with a UFO, leaving him mesmerized and obsessed with finding out the truth behind the UFOs. Our other main character is single mum Gillian, who lives on a rural farm with her young child, who is abducted by aliens. She sets out to find her boy, eventually crossing paths with Roy on their quests. All the while, there is a government operation in place to investigate these encounters that are leading to strange phenomena, whilst keeping it secret from the public. Roy's obsessions continue to grow throughout the film, leading his already fed-up wife to take the kids and leave. Individuals who experience these encounters begin exhibiting strange behaviors, leading them to Devil's Tower, the mountain location of the aliens' planned place of contact. The government specialists at the site begin to communicate with the UFOs using large electrical light and sound boards, mimicking the 5-note tone that had been recognized numerous times throughout the film. The UFOs gradually appear in the dozens, culminating in the appearance of the massive mothership that lands at the site, releasing the abductees, including Gillian's son. The film ends with Roy boarding the mothership, selected by the aliens to join their travels. The first thing that came to mind at the conclusion of this film was that it ends with arguably as much mystery as when it started, which is not an issue per se. After all, his first film Duel ended in a similar fashion, and I loved that film. This film, however, seemed to have a theme throughout of seeking the truth, finding answers, and yet it ends with our main protagonist making a very questionable decision to board the ship, leaving a major plotline unanswered. I'm speaking specifically about his family, of course. Yes, they left him, but I was expecting a sort of redemption arc for his character to win his way back into their good graces. It wouldn't even have to be as typical as reuniting with them and living happily ever after. I'm imagining something along the lines of his family showing up to the site at the end, saying goodbye to them as he boards the ship to take on a more important galactic role as a sort of ambassador to Earth. This way he achieves redemption with his family, who sees he was telling the truth all along, whilst also fulfilling his greater purpose to mankind, something his family would be immensely proud of, despite his leaving them. I wondered if I was just too inclined to want a happy ending, that perhaps I missed the point of the actual ending. But then I came across a quote from Steven Spielberg talking about Close Encounters of the Third Kind in 2005, stating, "I made Close Encounters when I did not have children, and if I were making it today, I would never have had Roy leave his family and board the mothership." So there you go. I guess it just comes down to where you are in life that determines how one would end this film. The film exhibits all of the familiar qualities we've seen in the Spielberg films so far: mystery, tension, concealment, and of course, the everyman. The concealment aspect is expertly executed once again. The first encounter that Roy has with the UFO relies almost exclusively on light and sound to convey their presence. Whilst they are shown in a later scene zooming over the road, we don't really get a clear shot of them until the very end of the film. This makes their entrance at the end even more amazing to witness. Speaking of which, I want to acknowledge how impressive the visual effects are for the mothership as it's hovering over the mountain. Obviously, I'm speaking in the context of 1977, which I can easily imagine would have been groundbreaking at the time, and still looks beautiful now. The zoom-in close-up is also used extensively throughout this film, emphasizing those facial expressions as they stare in wonder at the extraterrestrial subject matter. I mentioned the everyman, and I feel like this is the best depiction of all of Spielberg's films chronologically to this point. Roy feels like the most three-dimensional character he's had to work with so far. His introductory scene that also shows his interpersonal dynamics within this family is very well done. You gain a pretty sufficient idea of each family member's personality. It sets up early on that Roy is already bad at responding to his wife or acknowledging her feelings, so it's already an easy bridge to cross when he starts going off the rails. Whilst I was fully on board with Roy's obsessive spiral into madness, the issues I have with this character come into play towards the end of the film. Firstly, The kiss with Jillian. What the hell? Like, I get that he was about to leave to do something potentially dangerous, but it felt like a complete betrayal of his family that wasn't even paying off any sort of significant setup between Jillian and Roy. Which brings me to the other issue with this moment, is that it's not explained why he has seemingly lost all care for his family. Even if he just showed a bit of regret for kissing Jillian, something like that would have given some sense of care for them. But from the moment his family leaves him, he makes no attempt to get them back. I found this very jarring and, most of all, contradictory to his character, and ultimately made me dislike him a little by the end. The film is notable, however, for marking the introduction of what is known as the Spielberg light, or what the man himself refers to as God lights. You've all seen what I'm talking about, but have probably never heard this term before. Basically, it's the use of heavy background lighting in shots to emphasize silhouettes in the foreground. This is very much present in Close Encounters, none more than the absolutely iconic shot of the child opening the door to find a bright orange light beaming through the door. As mentioned, I had never seen this movie before, yet I was very familiar with that shot just because of how famous it is in the vastness of film history. It's such a striking image for a number of reasons, but the most important being the simultaneous promise of danger and wonder that it poses. Imagine if it was an adult opening that door. It would not have anywhere near the same impact. But that sense of innocence and imagination that a child beholds is essential to making this work, and boy does it work. I haven't spoken much yet about the B-plot of this film, which begins with the reappearance of the World War II US aircrafts that disappeared in the Bermuda Triangle in 1945. This discovery sets off the events for the rest of the film, as a team of American and French scientists investigate the findings. This storyline creates a nice contrast against the more intimate scenes involving Roy. It shows the more global ramifications of these close encounters and how they affect the world, versus how the same events affect a small family in the middle of nowhere. I felt both storylines were paced very well and converged nicely in the final act. Something else that is worth noting about Close Encounters is that it marks the start of a Spielberg trend involving the reoccurring use of actors for periods of time. Richard Dreyfuss stars as the main lead in this film, coming off his supporting role in Jaws. He follows this period with Harrison Ford obviously in the Indiana Jones films, Tom Hanks for a number of films, then Tom Cruise, all the way through to Mark Rylance in his more recent films. I thought this was interesting as it's not uncommon for directors to continually work with the same actors, but Spielberg seems to do so in phases. We're graced with a beautiful score by John Williams in his second outing with Spielberg. The 5-note tonal phrase is used in abundance, along with sweeping melodies that complement the visually vast landscapes. One interesting thing that was discovered about this film almost 30 years after its release was highlighted on an episode of Inside the Actors Studio, hosted by James Lipton with Steven Spielberg as his guest. The quote from Lipton goes, "Your father was a computer engineer, your mother was a concert pianist, and when the spaceship lands, they make music together on the computer," suggesting that Roy Neary's boarding the spaceship represents Spielberg's wish to be reunited with his parents. Spielberg stated that he had not consciously intended this, but admitted the possibility that he channeled this decision subconsciously. This also alludes to a broader theme in this film that feeds directly into Spielberg's personal life, and that is the difficult relationship he shared with his parents. His mother cheated on his father, who spent much time away from home at work. This led to a sense of longing for a father figure that he would feel through storytelling and creating fictional characters to heal a broken heart. Roy leaving aboard a UFO at the end of Close Encounters fits perfectly into this mindset and explains the regular occurrence of absent and separated parents in his films. As you can tell from my analysis, I have a lot of glowing things to say about Close Encounters of the Third Kind, but I also have some significant issues as well. Unlike his second film, The Sugarland Express, which I found to be consistently average, Close Encounters kind of turns out to be amazing a lot of the time, but also kind of disappointing at others. Overall, I can absolutely see the impact of this film and why it's considered a classic, not just amongst Spielberg's films, but amongst films in general. You can truly see the groundwork being laid, and it's almost a testing ground for what would go on to be his more superior alien film, and that is E.T. the Extraterrestrial. I give Close Encounters of the Third Kind a very solid 7.5 out of 10, placing it third on my list above The Sugarland Express, but below Jaws and Duel. Anyways guys, that concludes today's review. I hope you thoroughly enjoyed yourself. Please tune in again for the next episode of Directed by Steven Spielberg, which would be his fifth film, the 1979 war comedy 1941. Until then, thank you all for watching, and we'll talk to you next time. Bye.